indicated, we're now opening statements.
Good morning.
Morning.
Welcome back. Now is time for opening arguments. And just to let you know, thank you. I'll start over and introduce myself. Thank you very much for being here. I know that you probably know, I think prior from the judge, who I am, but my name is Susan Zerine, and I'm proud and honored to represent the state of Michigan and the people of Van Buren County as your elected prosecuting attorney. So now is the time for opening statements. It's our opportunity to tell you what to look for in the case, kind of our roadmap, what we plan to present to you over the course of the next several days, what evidence that we plan to present, and who will be testifying. So we talked a lot about in voir dire, about the charges and the elements. So I want to take a few minutes just to dive into what those elements are and what the charges are. We have count 1, first-degree murder, and we have count 2, felony murder. So what are the elements that we talked about that I need to prove to you? So for count 1, the very first element, the first box that we need to check, is that the defendant caused the death of Todd Stermer. That is, that Todd Stermer died as a result of the actions of the defendant. That's the first box. Second box, that the defendant intended to kill Todd Stermer. That's the second element. Third, that this intent to kill was premeditated. That is, thought out beforehand. And the last box, last element that I need to check on this count, is that the killing was deliberate, which means the defendant considered the pros and cons of the killing and thought about and chose her actions before she did it. There must have been real and substantial reflection for long enough to give a reasonable person a chance to think twice about the intent to kill. The law does not say how much time is needed. It's for you to decide if enough time passed under the circumstances of the case. And the killing cannot be the result of a sudden impulse without thought or reflection. Those are the 4 elements, the 4 boxes. So let's go to count 2. These are the 3 boxes for count 2. First, that the defendant caused the death of Todd Stermer. That is, that Todd Stermer died as a result of the actions of the defendant. Second box, that the defendant had one of these 3 states of mind. She intended to kill, or she intended to do great bodily harm to Todd Stermer, or she knowingly created a very high risk of death or great bodily harm, knowing that death or such harm would be the likely result of her actions. That's the third box. I'm sorry, the second. Third box is that when she did the act that caused the death of Todd Stermer, the defendant was committing or attempting to commit the crime of arson. Those are your elements. Those are the boxes that I will be then working to check over the next few days. I want to give you the definition that the court will give you of arson, because I think it's important in satisfying the second count. What is an arson? These are the elements of the arson. First, that the defendant burned, damaged, or destroyed by fire or explosive a dwelling. If any part of the dwelling is burned, no matter how small, that is all that is necessary to count as a burning. The property does not have to be completely destroyed. The dwelling is not burned if it's merely blackened by smoke, but it is burned if it is charred so that any part of it is destroyed. That's the first box. Second, that at the time of the burning, damaging, or destroying, the property that was burned, damaged, or destroyed was a dwelling or any of its contents. That's the second element. Last one, that when the defendant burned, damaged, or destroyed the dwelling or any of its contents, she intended to burn, damage, or destroy the dwelling or its contents, or intentionally committed an act that created a very high risk of burning, damaging, or destroying the dwelling or its contents, and that while committing the act, the defendant knew of that risk and disregarded it. Those are all of the elements or boxes. So let's start out with what happened. January 7th, 2007, deputies Tony Evans and Gary Gruss are dispatched to the house. It's a Sunday afternoon in January at approximately 3:30 in the afternoon. They go to County Road 215 for a reported structure fire. They find the Stermer residence in a fully involved fire. This is the scene that you will see and that we expect to present to you as they're driving in from their squad car. This is what they see. When they drive up, deputies locate several people standing on the north side of the residence. For those of you that are directionally challenged like I am, that's if you're looking at the front of the house, it'd be to the right of that picture. At this time, they locate Todd Stermer. He's laying in a pool of blood, approximately 20 to 25 yards from that side of that residence. Mr. Stermer this says unclothed. It's actually not 100% unclothed. His sweatpants and his underwear are pulled down to his ankles. He doesn't have a shirt on, and he's still wearing his socks. He is badly burned, and to say badly burned is an understatement. His burns cover almost all of his body. His hair is gone. His ears are deformed. His skin is slipping off his body. Due to his injuries, the people who are on scene try to move him farther from the home, just to be able to get him away from the fire and away from the house, and then they attempt to render aid. Due to the severity of Todd Stermer's injuries, he passes away shortly after people arrive due to those injuries. At this time, there are multiple people on scene, many of them who you'll hear from today. Mike Matheny, Connie Calhoun, our neighbors directly next door. Dr. Richard Musali, another neighbor, and Steve Leach, who was the fire chief at the time, all arrive within minutes and are on scene. You will hear from them what they saw and their statements. On January 7th, the day of the fire, the investigation starts. They call in after the original deputies are there. They end up calling in the detectives. They call in Detective Gabrielle Rout, who is now retired, and Detective Tom Maziowski, who's also now retired. And they respond to the scene a little bit later in the day. The investigation starts. They start collecting all the evidence that they have on scene. They take numerous photographs, of which we expect to present to you. And they find a van, still running, located in the west of the Stermer residence. So those of you who are directionally challenged, the van is running in the backyard. Tire impressions are located, and the detectives mark them with flags, the tire impressions leading to the van. There are several items of clothing that the neighbors we listed, have taken out and placed on Todd's naked, burned body. Those items are also collected by the detectives and put into evidence. You will also hear on January 7th, the day of the fire, People start trying to gather some initial statements. What happened? You're going to hear from Deputy Gary Gruss, hopefully today. He will tell you what Linda's first statement was. You will also hear from Detective Gabrielle Rout. She also talked to Linda Stermer on that day, and you will hear what she told Gabrielle Rout. As this investigation continues on the 7th and the 8th, Detective Sergeant Scott Leroy is brought to the scene. He's the fire marshal, and he's brought in to then inspect for the fire investigation. He arrives on the day of the fire on January 7th. He's actually there when Todd Stermer's there. He takes pictures of Todd. He takes pictures of the scene. And he's the one that seizes the sweatpants wrapped around Todd Stermer's ankles because he smells an accelerant. He also arrives on scene the next day and conducts a further investigation. He takes additional photographs, of which you will see. He examines the structure of the house and possible causes of the fire. You will hear from Dr. Markey at Sparrow Hospital, who conducted the autopsy. You will hear his cause of death is from those burns that he suffered. You will also hear on January 8th, Don Galuz, who's a Buren County Sheriff's Department deputy, is called to the scene to do mapping and distances of the scene. So I'm going to show you, I think this will show up on all of them. This is the driveway coming into the house here. Oops. You can see the house. You can see the north side where the victim and the tire tracks are here on the north. And you can see where the van is ultimately located in the backyard. And what makes this interesting is we expect to present to you details of the terrain of this yard. For those of you who are familiar with Michigan walkout basements, this is a walkout, meaning that where the body and the tire tracks are on the north side is a slope down. Where the van is at below the grade level, and there's sliding glass doors that lead out of the basement. He will explain the distance of the tire tracks. He will explain the distance from the house of the body and go over the scene in detail for you. You will also hear that on January 9th and 10th, James Shinsky is hired by the defendant's insurance company to conduct an investigation, their own investigation into the fire. He has a background as a fire investigator. He then does recorded interviews of Linda Stermer, with Linda Stermer, on January 9th and January 10th. You're going to start hearing, as people start digging in to the questions, start asking more questions, start going into the things that don't make sense, the explanations that the defendant starts giving, and how the story grows and changes. It's going to start here. That's her third statement. You are going to hear, or expect to present to you, Dave Hayhurst and Ann Hunt. They are both, Dave Hayhurst is with the Michigan State Police Laboratory, and Ann Hunt used to be and is now retired. They're going to talk to you about that van that was found in the walkout level in the backyard, that was driven by the defendant that day of the fire. They're going to talk about the multiple points that they examined, the evidence that was scraped from underneath the van, and how they evaluated it, and where it was found, and the results that is determined to be the blood of Todd Stermer. You're also going to hear that the defendant's purse is found in Todd Stermer's van in the front passenger area of that van. You are going to hear testimony from Troy Ernst, another scientist at the Michigan State Police Laboratory. He tested the clothing that was seized from Todd Stermer that day, and he tested for accelerants. You will hear his lab reports. January 15th, James Shinsky starts conducting his own fire investigation. During this investigation, he seizes several rags from the washer in the basement of the Stermer residence. These are collected by Mr. Shinsky and sent to a private laboratory for testing. We expect to present evidence to you from Craig Belliette. He's the chemist for Baker and Herbert Laboratories. He's also now retired. Many folks have retired since 2007. And he conducted an analysis of those rags that were seized from that washer by James Shinsky.
Your Honor.
What's the date on that last slide?
Let's see if I can go back here.
Okay.
January 26th, Mr. Balliet. On February 27th, Steve Willison, who's an attorney for Farm Bureau Insurance, also becomes involved. So again, part of the fire insurance investigation. Defendant sits for an examination under oath at the request of her insurance company. The plot starts to thicken. The statements start to become more descriptive, change. You'll hear how everything starts changing. Blame starts being shifted. Stories, statements, explanations continue to change. Linda gives a statement again about what happened on January 7th. And at that time, she implicitly denies having an extramarital affair. October 18th, several months now after the fire, it's still in 2007, Steve Willison sits with the defendant again for a second examination under oath. Talks to her again about the events of January 7th. They go over the details. They go over what doesn't make sense, what's not adding up. More questions are asked. More digging is done. Things don't make sense. I'm asking, as the evidence is presented, to focus on her statements. You will also hear from additional witnesses. Kate Fox is going to come in near the end. She was the former friend, actually best friend, of Linda Stermer. You're going to hear the statements that Ms. Stermer made to Kate Fox. Mr. Williams, Chris Williams, is going to come in. He's going to talk to you about how he started his extramarital affair with the defendant, knew she was married, knew her from work, 6 to 8 months prior to the fire. You're also going to hear from Kathy Ilg, another friend of the defendant, and statements that she made to Kathy. You're going to hear from Kim and Ken Thompson. They were also neighbors close by, not direct neighbors, but close by. They were actually on scene that day. They will tell you what they saw, what they heard, what the defendant said immediately after the fire in those days. You'll hear from Annette Crandall. She was also on scene on January 7th. You'll hear more statements that Linda made to her. At the end of the trial, you're going to hear from Trenton Stermer, Trevor Stermer, and Corey Pierce. All three are the sons of Todd and Linda Stermer. They were teenagers at the time of this fire. Now they're grown men. They're going to come in and talk to you. They're going to explain what it was like to live in the Stermer household, what the dynamics were, what the relationships were. They're going to talk to you about what happened that morning, the night before, to give you an insight as to what occurred in the hours preceding this fire. This trial is going to be, a lot of it's going to be about the evolution of Linda Stermer's statements. As people ask more and more questions to try to get to the root of what happened, to understand, to figure out what really went on. Just in the process of asking more questions, you're going to hear statements, how they change about the home life. You're going to hear statements that actually change about what happened in the morning of the fire. You're going to hear statements change about where Linda Stermer even exited the home, the most basic details. What door did you go out? You're going to hear her statements. You're going to hear her changing statements of what she observed. What did you see? Where was the fire? What did you see? And you're also going to hear a lot of missing details that may be shown by other evidence and that we expect to show you. Particularly important are the statements about running Todd Stermer over with the van. Statements about never seeing the defendant. Statements about why. Why would you drive to the back of the house on a walkout basement? Why? You'll hear them. At the end of this trial, ladies and gentlemen, all the boxes that we painstakingly went through in the beginning of this opening statement will be checked. And I am going to ask all of you to render a guilty verdict on counts 1 and count 2. Thank you very much.